Once you understand what life is truly about, you're entitled to nothing, and that you have no real inborn inherent privilege to anything. Everything comes as a result of your action, as a result of your sacrifice. And when you understand this, you seek perfection knowing you will never be perfect. You seek to constantly be becoming, to constantly be evolving. That's what's beautiful. That's what makes war beautiful, is that when it comes down to it, you see things as they really are. When you see life as it really is, it is completely beautiful because life is beautiful. And beauty is affirming life in its totality. And it's understanding that this conflict of power and of different wills and inequality that comes from it, which separates different human types from another, which separates the greater human types. This is beauty. And this is why war is beautiful. And this is why life, which is war, is beautiful. Legionaries, welcome to another podcast with myself, honored Legate of New Rome, and General Lance from Lance's Legion, also honored Legate of New Rome. Today we have a very good show for you today. We're going to be discussing Ernst Jünger, his views on war, some of his views on the issues as well with the sort of modern bourgeois liberal governments of today. His contributions to our sphere and just the general ideas and physical manifestations that his life was in regards to the sort of Nietzschean ideals, and how in a lot of ways he is this sort of this futurist military overman that Nietzsche would envision as integral to sort of propelling us, being that bridge to evolving as humans and toward sort of taking us into the future. So I guess I'll just briefly introduce Jünger's early life and then we can get started. So I'm sure a lot of you are relatively familiar with Ernst Jünger. If you have been in this sphere for a good amount of time, obviously he is a very important contributor to the DR in general, but just an early life sort of summary of Ernst Jünger. He was born to a relatively well-off middle-class family. He was part of I always get this confused, Lance. Is it Vondervogel or Wunderwall? I always get the two confused.
Vondervogel.
Vondervogel. And it was essentially this group of youth. It was almost like a social rebellion at the time, and they would go outside and go for hikes and be out in nature, right? So it's this sort of youth movement at the time. And from this early sort of experience with nature, for his whole life, Jünger is very interested in, I believe, botany. And he during World War I believe he collected like some 200 samples of different bugs and insects. So he's very interested in these things. And that's his early life until he reached young adulthood, where he actually joined the French Foreign Legion, I believe in 1913, about a year before the onset of the war. And of
That's
course, right, the French Foreign Legion, very high thumos decision of him to rebel
right.
against his I guess relatively well-off life, right? Like he doesn't have to do something as crazy as join the French Foreign Legion. Maybe we can touch up on that in a second. But of course, during the onset of World War I, he wants to go back to Germany and fight for the Vaterland, right? So I think his father was close to a member of the royal family, and if you know more about that, Lance, feel free to cut in. I forget who it was exactly, but he got like some high-ranking member in Germany to sort of write a letter to get him transferred from being basically in the French military back to the German military. And he starts off as an enlisted man, but very early on he gets put into officer courses, becomes an ensign, a lieutenant, and even an acting captain towards the end of the war. So yeah, that's just the basic sort of early life of Jünger, and we'll go more into some of the other things that took place within his life that are quite profound. So I guess getting right into it, Lance, what are some of your first thoughts you'd like to share with the audience regarding Jünger?
So I think the first thing to understand about Jünger is that he's a very kind of unique figure in the fact that he is not your archetypical like military figure, in the sense that he's not a yes man, right? Like if you go in any modern military in the West, it's always these yes men, these like bureaucrats, they're losers, right? And this guy is just completely different. He's not, like, he calls himself the anarch, right? Because really he isn't just, he's a true believer in something outside of himself. He believes in himself and acts throughout the world, of course, and follows wherever his convictions may be. So, I mean, this is a very different kind of prototype or archetype of warrior, right? And this is the kind of person that we're trying to cultivate, because ultimately, I mean, he had this quote that he basically is not a he is a volunteer. He is not a, true believer in any one cause except one for himself. And it turns out that basically everything he does turns out really great, in the sense that because he is so genuine and true to himself and his mission, his personal mission, his life becomes a work of art. And Heidegger reflects on Jünger as the preeminent Nietzschean inheritor, but not because he wrote philosophy, not because he sat there and wrote about like the metaphysics of the world and all this kind of stuff. No, he just acted in it, and even his fiction were acts of his fiction was actually an act in and of itself. So, I mean, I think it's really important to understand that Junger is this man of letters, the kind of archetype that we're trying to cultivate, and trying to make the man of the future to become, both leader and artist, both warrior and poet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's something that we talked about like before we started the podcast as well. Is like Junger, I think, displays very well the balance of Apollonian and Dionysian. Kind of like you said, like he's both the warrior and the artist. And there's a lot of good quotes that I can point to illustrate this, but it's worth noting, right? Obviously, he has to be a very disciplined figure, and he is a very disciplined figure. Notably, he stays very stoic during the war. There's many lines within Storm of Steel, like tons of lines, where he's just talking about how, like, an artillery shell explodes feet away from him, and he feels the shrapnel fall onto him, or he watches one of his friends blown up literally feet away from him, or shot, or whatever, and he takes it very stoically. I think there's a brilliant line of Storm of Steel, and I'm paraphrasing here, where he talks about the birds and how the birds are never quiet on the battlefield, how you don't hear the birds when there is a barrage of artillery or the rifle fire or machine gun fire, but as soon as it ceases, you hear the birds singing again. And he notices the beauty in the lulls of violence during war. He's very stoic, but he's not stoic in a sense where he's detaching himself from it. He's embracing all of it, but he endures it well. He does not see it as suffering, but simply as experience. And obviously, during Storm of Steel, he also has like an affair with, I believe, a young French woman or a young Belgian woman. Throughout his life, he writes in this very almost not quite avant-garde, but in a way where it's very colorful. Like if you've read On the Marble Cliffs, the way that he writes about the sort of life that he has. It's a life where he's enjoying things. He's enjoying the bountiful fruits of all the great things that you can have when you affirm life in its totality. He's somebody who is in touch with the Dionysian side, right? But he is also this man of great discipline and this man of great resolve, and possesses the ability to wage violence upon his enemies. And what's interesting about Junger is he's almost born this way. I mean, obviously, everybody is the product of their environment to a certain extent, but there isn't really this big sort of like shift in his life. He's kind of the man that he is from the beginning for the most part. He's very young when World War One starts. So in contrast to somebody like Mishima, who starts off very frail and then becomes this sort of heroic figure, Junger is almost like that way from the beginning. So I find that very interesting. But like precisely as you say, is he's a very honest person. He's very perceptive. He observes what he sees, and he is this fusion of life. He's this fusion of experience, and he takes things as it is. And of course, there's many good quotes that I'd like to read out, but I guess my question to you would be, is seeing that he is the heir, in a sense, to Nietzsche in terms of his life and his action, I think we could both agree that it's almost you yourself as like an aesthetic ideal, or you yourself as a work of art that truly makes you Nietzschean. It's like you have so many word cells today, right? And it's like what do you have to say about, like, you have all these word cells who maybe understand Nietzsche very well, but it's like obviously if you don't have that physical manifestation of those ideals, like what's the point?
Well, it's like, I mean, the best way to kind of create an allegory for you who are listening, the difference between knowing and knowing, right? There's one thing about knowing about, for instance, MMA. I know conceptually that this is how it's done, this jujitsu move, an armbar, right? It's quite a different thing to do it and to know it in your body and to be able to do it without thinking. So that way, ultimately, every action you make is enmeshed in your brain. So the way I like people to envision thinking in their mind or knowing something is that your cognition, so your abstract thinking, the brain that uses kind of abstract thought and words and concepts, these things that at like the fore of your mind, the frontal cortex. This is just like the first part of the thread, right? And you start weaving it into your body. The deeper you come to understand something, the less you need to think about it straight out, and the more you simply act on it in instinct.
Hmm.
So the more that you do something habitually, the more you become that thing. Hence why Heraclitus talks about the idea that you become that thing that you habituate yourself to. Okay, and this is like in no like this is no like you know abstract reasoning. I mean, you are what you do every day, and it basically starts becoming a part of your psyche. It becomes you. You end up acting in the world as the person that you generally turn to be. And so, zooming back to the word cell, it's like it's one thing to be a word cell and to know about his concepts. It's quite another thing to act on it with such habit, to constantly be that thing, that they're not Nietzschean in that sense. They just know of Nietzsche. They
Hmm.
don't do Nietzsche. So I don't know if that makes any sense, or if it really kind of brings it home for people. But it's really important that people understand that Nietzsche isn't a philosophy you think about. It's a philosophy you think about and then do. And then
Hmm.
once you do over enough time, you become that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I can definitely relate to what you said personally, because I have, though I've always had an interest in philosophy, and these sort of feelings have been within me, I think from birth, really. I never had the words to describe it. And, it's important to understand the root of your instinct so that it doesn't become abstracted and subverted. However, I can absolutely resonate with that because, like, when I did MMA, for example, as a youth, right? I didn't have any like Nietzschean concept in my mind. I just knew that I loved victory, I loved to win, and I loved to be something more than the average person. I could never take that. I like as a kid, and I think I told you this before. Like as a kid, I always hated hearing my parents talk about, like, oh, little Timmy just won another trophy. Like little Timmy's so great. It's like, no, I want to be better than little Timmy. It wasn't like jealousy exactly. It was more like competition. I had this competitive fire where I couldn't stand not being the best. And maybe that sounds a little
Good.
bit, yeah, all right.
That's
That's like we want
great.
to we want to uh, feel that competitive fire, right? And I think in a lot of ways, war ends up being this sort of arena for Junger, where he sort of what's the word, forges that instinct, and it takes a real physical manifestation. I think ultimately, right, though there are abstractions and subversions of the Nietzschean ideal, it ultimately is an ideal that comes out the most and that is expressed most accurately through warfare, right? And I want to get your thoughts on this, but I just want to read a couple of quotes that I think really capture this sort of feeling. And when he's talking about war, this is from Storm of Steel. He says, "This was the home of the great god Pain, and for the first time I looked through a devilish chink into the depths of his realm, and fresh shells came down all the time." And I think what this quote captures is that, war is, like I said, the true manifestation of the Nietzschean ideal or the heroic ideal or just life in general. War is the most authentic expression of this because even before you have mass organizations of people hunting and taking down prey or fighting its predators, this is the first arena of war. That's the first preceding that's what precedes everything else, is this struggle for survival, warfare, right? And then the quality of a human type is most accurately represented in war. So Junger confronts all the most authentic and raw and terrible realities of what life is through war. And I think that that's interesting because it's like a lot of people have to conceptualize this through, like I said, the sort of word cell path. So, like for Mishima, right, he is a word cell early on before he has his spiritual transformation. So, I guess my question for you, Lance, would be seeing that, Junger finds these ideals through war, and he sort of like discovers someone like Nietzsche along the way. Like he read Nietzsche during the war, and of course more afterwards. But it's like, what do you think the value is in truly being exposed to those ideals at the most authentic and base level, and your philosophy being formed by these things that ultimately are the core? Like war is the core of all these things that we think about. That's the most raw and authentic manifestation of where these ideals come into play. So, like, what would you say is the benefit of that, and how does that change the psyche, and how does that form the sort of man that Junger is, for example?
Well, I mean, the way I see it is that I mean, how you define yourself, let's break it all the way down. So, psychologically speaking, the whole point of life beyond merely survival is an expression of self, mastery of space and time, and to make it a reflection of oneself, right? And ultimately, you will meet abrasion. You will meet not just simply obstacles, but I mean, it just simply acting in the world is constant overcoming. It is constantly meeting setbacks, enemies of all types. And in civilian life, that is pretty subtle, especially because in times of peace, people tend to deceive each other, but also the everyday grind of having to, basically do the whole civilian thing of being polite and kind and have a little smile on your face just to make everyone happy, and like you're not able to really see who is the enemy because there are
Mm-hmm.
daggers in men's smiles, but it's hard to see those daggers sometimes, right?
Yes.
And it comes in every other sense too. I mean, for instance, especially if you're in a time of peace, because of the fact there is no outward threat or prevalent or like in your face threat, people drop pack. And then there's the enemy that is hard to kind of explain, but the enemy of basically, how do you say, uh, soothing, lulling into a low defensive posture of weakness, letting yourself let yourself go, thinking to yourself, oh, there's no need to fight. There's no need to keep on pressing oneself. And so, anyway, bringing it back to World War I and talking about war, I mean, war is ultimately the crux of humanity. It is the reality of nature itself. It's undeniable truth about life, which is the arbitrariness of war, right? You can't control whether or not a shell is going to fall on you.
Mm-hmm.
You can't control, even if you're the best soldier out there, you can't control, if 20 dudes rush you with bayonets and you have a bayonet, you're still going to lose. Let's say like, especially charging a machine gun, a lot of it's up to the caprice of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it makes me think about the Bhagavad Gita, and it talks about how you have a right to the duty, to the action. You don't have a right to the fruits of your action. And people kind of don't understand what that means, right? Because ultimately, the conflict or the conquest is within. Everything is within. It's within your soul. It's never about a reflection of the outside. It's what you do in those circumstances which define the defeat or the victory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So it doesn't matter whether or not you go out there and you rush that machine gun nest and you take it, and you're successful and you beat off any attack or whatever. What matters is that when you did it, you did so by self overcoming. You did so because the city within yourself uh, maintained its integrity and your will was uncompromising, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, the reason why war is so important is precisely because it cuts off in your mind this pretense that your actions have consequences, in
Mm-hmm.
the sense of there is no like uh, when it comes down to it, like no matter how good, quote unquote, or bad you are, quote unquote, there will always be action. There will always be consequences that are not commensurate with your actions. The measure of yourself has to do with the values that you set within yourself. So within your own psyche, there's a general and there's a soldier, right?
Hmm.
And the entire point of life is being able to be true to the commands of your general, strong in the your little there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would touch up on that as well. I just finished doing a video on man and technics, and there's actually, I think this sort of describes a lot of what you're saying. You're talking about like sort of comfortable person today is like what they don't realize, what the bourgeois does not realize, that things like politics or business or whatever, I mean, they are all also abstractions of war to a great degree. If you think about the economy, for example, the issue that Spengler points out is that you have the sort of idealist in the 19th century, the aristocratic elite that has grown detached from war, that has grown detached from the reality of will to power, and they sort of see war as barbaric, right? They see the cultural projects as superior, and this leads to a very harsh response, which becomes liberalism and Marxism, which is sort of this ultra materialistic view of things, like through the material we can solve things. But they also get it wrong because ultimately all these things, and Spengler would call it technics, right? Technics is the technique of life. So industry, for example, the economy, engineering, these are all things that you want to excel at, not for prosperity but so that you will be better at war. That's what people don't realize, is that the bourgeois is also preparing for war indirectly. Preparing the industry of our country is preparing us so that during times of war we can produce the military equipment necessary to fuel our military campaigns. Like, this is all the undercurrent of everything that we do. And it's like politics is war at the end of the day. And I've said this many times, right? And I think when you said you said like people do things purely for the action. It's like you're not entitled, or sorry, you said people do things, for example, for the result, and they feel entitled to the result. But all we are entitled to is the becoming, not the become. And I think this relates to human rights a lot. Is like the modern liberal believes that they are entitled to human rights without the recognition that rights are the privilege of power. They're the privilege of the sovereign that can uphold those rights. And again, this goes down to becoming versus become. All we can really do is be a constant becoming. The become is not guaranteed. So it's like you mentioned storming the machine gun's nest. If you could read the future and you're like, holy shit, I only have a 10% chance of being successful, right? Then, and you take the coward's way out because you're afraid of the result, versus the man who says, I have to charge this machine gun nest no matter what. What matters is that I uphold my honor while I charge it, whether I live or whether I die. And I think, again, it comes back to becoming versus become, dropping pack versus enduring, right? And I want to also point out that the sort of, like I said, the modern bourgeois life is still warfare. It's just this abstraction of warfare. We don't realize that everything we do today, regardless of what your employment is, if you are an American, you're working for an American company, for example, like the trade war between China right now, that's all preceding what will eventually become actual conflict. And even if it never turns to that, that's the end state, right? If you take it to its extreme. So everything we do is literally preparing for the conflicts of the future. All this is related to war, and you can't try to pretend that there is any real detachment from it. It's just an abstraction where you lose sight of it. And I want to point out to a few quotes from Junger, actually. And, in The Worker, or Der Arbeiter, Junger talks about how the liberal views war, and how the liberal views war as something that must be morally justified or appear defensive. And the reason is because the liberal conception of warfare is abstracted and skewed because their political elite is no longer the political elite of the past who actually fight the wars. When you have a military elite, when the nation, which is directly tied to an elite, has an interest that it must act upon to increase its power, it will do so very straight up because the military is in charge when they want to go to war. Well, they're also the people fighting the war, so it's very simple and straightforward. And obviously, there's still casus bellis and whatnot, and you still have to create some false flag operation once in a while. But generally, it's more straightforward. Whereas today, because the liberal elite is not a military elite, they must convince the lower classes of society to do their fighting for them. And when you have to convince the lower classes, when you're not doing the fighting yourself, when you're trying to get someone to do your dirty work for you, a lot of times they have to propagandize. They have to say, well, we're fighting for this country's freedom, or this is unavoidable, this is defensive, right? That's the liberal conception of warfare that Junger points out. And so you end up with this individual, like the sort of ideal individual of a country, and they're no longer heroic. They're no longer somebody who is willing to sacrifice. They become someone very individualistic because people dance around what they have to do to get what they want. In this liberal society, people get others to do their dirty work. They're not out there sacrificing for any higher ideal because it's very individualistic. And he has this quote where he says, heroes, lovers, and believers don't extinguish. They are rediscovered in every age. And in this sense, myth always emerges. The situation in which we find ourselves resembles an interlude in which the curtain has fallen while a disconcerting mutation of the worker accessories is taking place. And to me, this describes what I'm saying, where the bourgeois thinks his life is just his life. He thinks his life is just, how am I going to make myself better? How am I going to make myself more comfortable, have more access to pleasure and whatnot? But like Junger points out, is like, well, this is simply the lull between the next great explosion of conflict and warfare. And so the heroic ideal is still within us. It needs something to in which it will be evoked, which is often warfare. And World War One, as horrible as it was for many people, definitely serves this purpose with Junger. And I think today, because we are so detached from this ideal, we're so detached from the heroic ideal, because we don't see what the world is, we live in these safe bubbles, we forget that, well, we're simply living in a lull between the next great explosion. And when that happens, again, we're going to see the reality of life, which is that war is the undercurrent of all. And I rambled a little bit there, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're talking in a literal sense, and that's absolutely true. I mean, whether people like it or not, and you see this, and this is the underpinning. I remember reading, I used to study economics, and I remember reading this 19th century economist who talked about how pacifism was possible because if trade is able to penetrate borders of nations, then basically armies need not follow, right? Because the idea is that the reason why we go to war is for resources.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, not only is that just not true, we go to war for many different reasons, and that whether people like it or not, it's not just because of resources or some bullshit like that. But I mean, let's assume that he's telling the truth. Well, I mean, even if it's peacefully done, I mean, you read a book such as Unrestricted Warfare by these twin PLA colonels who were using not kinetic, non conventional ways of pursuing international policy of the PRC in the United States
Mm-hmm.
by means of, for instance, practicing trade, practicing things which we assume are, oh, it's going to lead to peace. And so it's always false because people think that just because you're able to have peace and immigration and all this kind of stuff that somehow war is abolished. No, it just means that the arena of conflict has shifted, has changed, and it's become a lot less in your face and more subtle. But it doesn't mean that it's not just there. I mean, look at the West right now. Look how it's falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Look at it. I mean, it's ridiculous, and that's all a product of first of all, obviously derelict elites, but also the fact that it just comes down to how do you say the fact that people are waging war against us constantly, and just because no one's in your face with a bayonet, spearing you through the skull, doesn't mean that like people are not actively destroying you or seeking to destroy you or maneuvering on you, and that ultimately, here's the other pretense of the economists, of the liberal bourgeoisie, which is also another falsehood: the falsehood of infinite resources, of the line go up no matter what you do, type ethos. Because the reality is there's a limit. I'm not trying to get Malthusian here, but there's always a limit to how many resources there may be, right? There's always a limit to, um, you know, like how much living space there may be, how much we may express ourselves. Because remember, every time you believe in tolerance, that comes at the expense of true expression of oneself, not simply within your life, but throughout life, right? Like the idea is not simply to be a home interior designer. The idea is also to be able to do, I mean, to write civilizations and to change the face of the earth in your image, right? And so when Jung talks about war, right, when he talks about all these things which matter, because they're affecting us even to this day in real life. I mean, we are very much careening towards a conflict with the PRC and with let's see, Russia and all the coalescing forces which want to see the overthrow of liberal hegemony. Um, you know, we are going to see an era of unprecedented warfare. And if I might even continue to ramble just a little bit, and then I'll hand it back to you, things such as sabotage missions. I mean, I remember just seeing there was this general, this retired Marine Corps general, suspiciously killed or slash dead, unalived at the 29 Palms or
Yeah.
whatever,
Hmm.
and it's under extremely suspicious circumstances. And obviously, we don't know the reason. I don't know the reason. I'm not pretending to know the reason, but I mean, if anyone has any common sense and understands what's going on, especially because he just came from Ukraine, he's likely advising people, and it's likely that they're probably doing a tit for tat because we've been killing a lot of their generals with our own like munitions and smart munitions and stuff. It is incredibly possible that it all has to do with that. But again, like I said, war never changes, right? That's the common quote. War never changes, and it never really does. And that's
Hmm.
why Junger is so important. And I urge all of you legionaries to read.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also would suggest, you mentioned the PLA and those two kernels, and there's actually a very good book. It is a bit lib coded, but it's still a good book in terms of understanding the PLA strategy, and it's called A 100-Year Marathon. It's by a guy, I believe his name's Michael Pillsbury, but he's talking about what you brought up is that the PLA has, when they deal with us, we deal with them in a very liberal sort of way where we're trying to like mutual cooperation. If we help them out economically, they're going to liberalize, and over time it's going to be peaceful. But they've been taking advantage of us since the Nixon administration, since we've propped up the PLA as a sort of another buffer against the Soviet Union. They have been benefiting very unequally compared to us. We've been putting a lot more into them than they've been putting into us since the Nixon administration, I believe, under the advisement of Kissinger, actually. And um, because of this, because we've been helping them out, thinking that they're going to liberalize, it's actually led to them getting stronger and us getting weaker. So, like, a lot of the times, they will have propaganda which makes them appear like, oh, we're so close to liberalizing, we're so close. Like, people don't realize Deng Xiaoping was did not liberalize China at all. He was very much a hardcore communist. People think of him as this, gentle old man who's like all amicable, and it's like, no, he just wants China to modernize and be like everybody else in the world. No, he was just a great master manipulator. He manipulated the West into making him seem like this harmless person, meanwhile building the foundations which leads up to eventually a guy like Xi Jinping. And the Chinese are notably very selfless. They care only about the collective goal. Deng Xiaoping knew he in his lifetime would never see Chinese hegemony, but he was willing to sacrifice and do everything he could covertly to eventually do so in the future, right? It's why it's called the 100-Year Marathon, and I recommend all of you read it. They actually connect a lot of Chinese strategies even to something as old and simple as Sun Tzu. So it's very good. I recommend you read that. But I do want to take it back, right, to this idea of bourgeois life versus martial life. And it's like, you brought up like war is not just for resources, right? But even if it were, the liberal perspective is just plain wrong. And it doesn't even help you from a perspective of, well, we're trying to win wars to increase our resources. But yeah, it's much more than just a material thing. And like I said, that's the issue of liberalism and Marxism, is that they try to solve a fundamentally spiritual problem with something material, and that never works out in the end. And I think looking at the sort of individual that emerges from liberalism versus the individual that emerges from a martial ethos, you clearly see that he who comes from a martial ethos is superior. And I think that's very well illustrated if you compare All Quiet of the Western Front to Storm of Steel. And of course, All Quiet
Yes.
on a Western Front is fiction, so it's a little different. But it's like Remarque is this guy who comes in at the end of the war, right? He bitches all the time, you know. He does not engage in nearly close to the amount of combat that Junger did from the very beginning of the war, I might add. But he's just bitching the whole time, you know. He's complaining, and it's like, look, I can't pretend I understand what it's like because I have not been in war, but from a very like logical perspective, it's like, who would you rather have? Would you rather have Remarque, who's complaining all the time and is a Debbie Downer, you know, bring everybody else down, like, oh, my life sucks, or would you rather have a guy like Junger, who even if you're bleeding out beside him, he's not pitying you, he is glorifying your sacrifice. That's the great thing about Junger. His friends are literally blown apart in front of him, but he never gets to this point of pity. It's always, you know, he died valiantly. You know, like he's like, I made this officer friend the other day, and then a day later I watch him getting cut down, but he did so valiantly. You know, the person that comes from the martial ethos is clearly superior. And there's another great quote I want to read for everybody that I think captures this idea that those who seek the life of danger, the martial ethos, so to speak, are superior to the bourgeois person who is very individualistic and seeks his own quote unquote pursuit of happiness. And I'm going to read this quote and then explain it a little bit, and then I'll get your thoughts as well, Lance. In the close proximity of death, blood and earth, the spirit takes on harsher features and deeper colors. Existence itself, in all its strata, is more sharply threatened, right up to that almost forgotten kind of hunger against which each economic system fails, such that life itself represents the choice between downfall or conquest. And understanding life as it is, right? Understanding this quote is to understand that only by seeking danger and by coming to terms with danger do you really understand the value system that is exchanged in life. If you think about survival, even, which is very material, right? But you just think about survival. For most of human history, to survive on a daily basis meant walking alongside death. Life was literally war. Life was, I need to kill or be killed. I need to kill this animal to feed my family, or I will starve to death, or I need to kill this predator or this rival tribe to survive. That is the undercurrent. War is the undercurrent of life. And the man of martial ethos understands this and understands only by seeking danger can we actually actualize the kind of person we need to be, because the bourgeois individual who avoids danger, right, who only fights when he has to, you know, he only fights in defense of his territory or whatever. It's like having a defensive posture is not what's going to make your country the most powerful or make your collective group the most powerful or your state the most powerful, because ultimately you're going to have individuals that only seek out their own interests. That's what happens when you have a society that is defensive, that only cares about the happiness, quote unquote, of the individual. It's like they have no impetus to sacrifice for the greater collective. Whereas a man like Junger, who comes from a martial ethos, who understands that his existence is sewn into the fabric of his nation, into the fabric of the soldiers by his sides, that they are all one force. And he talks about this, and I believe Storm of Steel or On Pain. It's like when you have a mass of steel helmets, you are one entity. 120 men of a company are one entity. And when you understand that you, as part of that entity, must walk alongside death, even if it means your own, that it's not about the become, it's not about surviving the battle, it's about the becoming. It's about, I will uphold honor so that my collective group, my higher ideal, is successful in the end, that we are one step closer to triumph, right?
Yes, and I mean, it goes all the way back to your comment about Deng Xiaoping. I mean, it's like this idea that really what we're seeing right now is that being an individual is the worst thing you can do. There's this term, divide and impera, right? Divide and
Mm-hmm.
conquer. Well, if someone can convince you that the individual is all that matters, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's how you destroy families. That's how you basically turn into a libtard, right? So basically, that's how you're able to abandon your family for your own self-interest. That's how you're able to abandon your country for your own self-interest. That's how you're able to abandon your civilization, your gods, for everything for your own self-interest.
Mm-hmm.
You know who wins? Teams. Teams always win. And I think that's something that like was the first thing that was like destroyed within me, which I really enjoy at boot camp is that comment, "Oh, so you're an individual now." It's like I mean it's true.
Yes.
It's like holy shit, like you start to see what you're able to accomplish as one team. You are one team, one nation. You know what I mean? So like
Yes.
that's something that the liberal can't comprehend. It can't understand. It can't understand things such as self-sacrifice. They can't understand things such as the beauty of death because to them their death is final because they're bugs, right? So if
Hmm.
one person dies, that's the end of their spiritual horizon. But you and I, when we die, guess what? There's always going to be a new legionary, a new Roman. We are always one team.
Hmm.
And people say that it destroys the individuation of the person, which again is also incorrect. I mean, the fact is that basically throughout Western civilization, we've been able to understand that there are, it's basically an you are a part of a individuated whole. And if you go back to ancient Greece, for instance, and you talk about the classic polis or the polis, everyone was a citizen of a polis, and that was the most important thing possible about you, right? No matter where you went, ultimately you were of that place,
Hmm.
right? Which is part and parcel of why Alcibiades was seen as so ignoble, is because when he left and, for instance, went over to Sparta, not only was it a betrayal, but he also betrayed his own custom, right? So he ceased to be an Athenian and he became a Laconian, right?
Hmm.
And so the issue here is that people don't understand. They'll say, "Oh, but Junger was an anarch. He just believed in himself." It's like, yes, he was Junger, but remember, Junger would be not Junger if he weren't German first,
Hmm.
and that's something that they will never accept. That's something that they will never like concede. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
so that is so important.
Yeah, and it's great that you brought that up. And I want to say, like, the one thing, at least that I know of now, the one thing where I will agree with Hegel, right? And, obviously, I disagree with a lot of what Hegel stands for. But the one thing I'll agree with him is in seeing the state as one sort of spiritual entity, right? It's like one man within a thousand men or 100 men or 1 million men. And seeing the state, right, like your collective group, your people, as an entity of its own is exactly what you need to have. I think it actually, like you said, I think it actually increases the kind of individual you are. When you are an individual within something greater, I think that makes you a bigger individual as well. If you think about any of the great heroes throughout history, whether it's Alexander or Achilles or Caesar or even Romulus, right? Like all these people are who they are, not just because they're an individual, but they're an individual within this higher ideal, which is like Rome, or maybe it's Greece, right? Or it's their specific city state. It's like there's the individual is actually made greater by his spiritual connection to something more than himself. So then his life, it doesn't just become about his life, it becomes about, well, after his life, what did his life mean? How did he make an imprint on the world? You make an imprint by promoting an ideal which lives on after yourself, right? And you're not afraid to sacrifice for that ideal. And that's why I think martyrdom is so powerful. And it's like, I forget who says it, but it's like, I think it was like an ancient text, maybe an ancient Roman text when they were dealing with Christians. And it's like, well, or something else, but they're basically saying like, well, maybe we shouldn't martyr these guys because it only makes them stronger, right? It's like the Soviet quote where it's like um, the Mujah is impossible to defeat because he sees paradise at the end of a rifle barrel, right? It's like there's so much more than that individual life. It becomes about contributing to the higher ideal or the greater collective of what you represent and what represents you. So it's like, well, Jung or the anarch, in a lot of ways, people who truly understand what freedom is power, right? Power is what equals freedom. So nobody on their own can truly be free without also being part of something greater. You cannot be free if you're not part of this higher ideal, this greater ideal, right? No man can live on his own, right? So even within that, right, there's that. And I think going further with this idea of like what is heroic, for example, what is heroism is never this like really lame, oh, I'm living for my own pursuit of happiness. Even selfishness in the legends, right, like Achilles being selfish, even that sort of selfishness it's not this petty bourgeois liberal selfishness. It's more wanting the respect from your collective group, wanting the respect, right? And I know you're a big fan of Agamemnon, so maybe you have some beef with
Yes.
Achilles, but but you know, I understand it. It's like he's not this lame individual, like this, you know, like, oh, you know, how dare you not let me live the way I need to live it, or whatever. It's like people that think they should live however they want are so stupid, because the only reason they even can think about having that privilege is because there's a sovereign strong enough, there's a collective group that actually helps them lead to that. And I think one of the reasons why war is so beautiful, and you know, like I said, what do I know of actual war, but conflict and combat, why it's so beautiful is because it distills everything down to exactly what life is. Life is exactly as it is in warfare. It's like you are no longer just you. You have to rely on other people. You have to be part
I
of the
might
team. Go ahead, yeah.
I might even add that we know it because we know its extreme opposite, which is this profound ugliness and meaninglessness, right?
Yes.
I mean, look, liberalism isn't a great paradigm to live under. It's like, yeah, okay, I can fill my house full of crap. I
Mm-hmm.
can fill my life full of crap. I can have the Bugatti. I can have the this and that. But at the end of the day, it all comes like it's ashes in your mouth, okay? Because it's like, for what? What are you doing with your life?
Mm-hmm.
It's not happiness. It's like dopamine happiness, which is a very thin and very shallow type of happiness. It's transient.
Mm-hmm.
What is the most deep catharsis you can have is a spiritual fulfillment. That is only begotten by something that's part of a grand project. Grand projects, by the way, can't be had at, they can't be begotten by yourself. You can't do things by yourself. You might be a man of genius, but your genius can only come as an expression, or probably as a as an aspect of a greater whole. Like Lycurgus would be no one if he were just an individual.
Mm-hmm.
Lycurgus is great because he birthed Sparta. Sparta was him, and he was Sparta. And this is where I kind of disagree with the BAP, right? Bronze Age pervert, is
Mm-hmm.
that he thinks that it's about the individual, and I get it. He's pushing against this like kind of like bug mass, like faceless bug mass. I get it. All right, no problem. But
Yeah.
like I think the thing that maybe he doesn't appreciate, or maybe it's just the way that he's articulating. I think he doesn't understand that every great general, every great leader, every great person, man, woman, philosopher, whatever it may be, they are only great because they are a flourishing or a face of this great whole. They would be nothing or no one without them. They would be no one. They would be no one. And it's like, okay, like, yeah, okay, maybe they could continue to make great works and stuff like that, but it's like having a sun, like a solar system with a sun with no planets. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this, our solar system is so great because we have the Earth. We have interrelated things going on. We have a team going on. We have something beautiful going on, and it's not just because the sun burns bright and beautiful. That's not the only thing. Of course, it is the thing. It's the linchpin. It's the center of gravity. It's the thing that constitutes us, strongly together. But I think that's something people really need to understand. It's not one or the other. It's not collectivism or individuality. It's not liberty or discipline. It's not one or this or that. It's the superposition. It's
Mm-hmm.
the ability to have the good judgment to weave both these aspects together and be able to kind of not manufacture, but be able to understand what it is that will be the best balance. And for me, the Romans are the ones that best understood how to delineate the private individual and achievement, and the collective individual and achievement.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, the collective is an individual, right? Because it is a totality, right? So I think that's something that people really don't understand, and which is why we love Junger, by the way, because Junger, for all of his bluster about being an anarch, was always Germany's biggest patriot,
Yes.
even if it's not the case that he was loyal in the most how do you say, commonly understood way. He was loyal in a more viscerally deep way, a
Yes.
culturally true way. And that's why I think Junger is somebody who I want to cultivate as an ideal for us, for
Mm-hmm.
me especially. I mean, ever since I was a young kid, I remember thinking to myself, this is who I want to be. this is what I want to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can relate that because when I was a younger kid, I also felt this way. No pun intended.
Yes, exactly.
I was kidding. No, I did feel that way too. It's like when I was a kid, like I loved martial arts as a kid, and I wasn't allowed to do it at first, but I always loved watching Bruce Lee or Manny Pacquiao and all these guys. My parents were always like, "No, you're gonna get brain damage. You're gonna get hurt." Well, it's like getting hurt and risking brain damage. That's what truly precedes all life is that you must risk danger for greatness, right? And so it's like all these things. It's like you feel this will within you, but like modern liberal bourgeois society is so anti this, and the reason why they're anti this is because our leaders are afraid that if people do seek danger, people do seek pain, people do seek the martial ethos, they'll start to realize, hey, why are our elites in power? They have no real instrument of power. They all rule through institutional power. So I think that's what they're so afraid of, and that's why we like a man like Junger. Junger was always loyal to Germany, even when he disagreed with them, right? He didn't leave Germany when the Nazis took over, even though he disagreed with them. He wrote books, and he wrote treatises that expressed his issues with the regime. And he was so respected in Germany that Hitler said, no one touches Junger. Like imagine the balls on that guy. That would have like sunk the Titanic before it got hit by the iceberg. The weight
Seriously,
of
seriously,
that.
seriously. I mean, like, it's no joke. I mean, people always come up with excuses for not being free. People understand, like, here's the thing is that if you've conquered yourself, if you're true to yourself, you're always free. Even if you may be killed outside, you're free. It
Hmm.
doesn't matter how young you may be. And liberals will go, I'm not free. It's like, dude, these people are constantly slaves of their own passions, and they
Yes.
believe that conquering outside oneself, that somehow, I don't know, constitutes being free. And no matter how much freedom, quote unquote, or power they may get, they're never free
Hmm.
because they're slaves. And that's the thing is that they don't understand this very primordial truth. And the truth being, of course, that it's not about like the outside, what happens in the material world. What happens is what happens within. It's what
Hmm.
happens within that matters. And it's like, and these people will never get it because ultimately they're a slave to the dopamine. They're a slave to getting the money, getting the the chicks, the this and then that, and they don't realize that it's like, no, 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 it's not about that, dude. It's about just being true to oneself. And this is the biggest threat to liberal bourgeois whatever rhetoric. And they this is why they see things with rising alarm, is that people start to understand, no matter how much money I have, no matter how much, a personal development I have, how hollow it rings in my heart. And what I long for far extends outside of simply my individual life. Because if we're an individual, all we are is just a bug, a cockroach, right?
Hmm.
But when we're together, when we're a team, that's when we become wolves together. That's when we become part of something that, first of all, is far older than we are and has far longer legs than we do in our personal lives. And if you
Hmm.
start understanding that and start being true to that, my friend, nothing can stop you. And that's why they want to take us down. I mean, that's why they want to take everyone down.
Absolutely, and it's like you said, all these things that they seek, it's like it's such bullshit because they're all abstractions of what life is really about. So it's like people can say, well, I want the Bugatti or I want the good car, or like you have people that have like mental health issues that are essentially spiritual hedonists. People that let mental health rule them as an excuse are spiritual hedonists, right? Because they
Right.
they, they completely are slaves to their emotions, and I think all this comes from not understanding what life is really about. People will point to the Greeks, for example, like, oh, birthplace of democracy, all this, all that. People don't realize how brutal the Greeks were. And people don't realize that all the beauty of the Greeks, all the artistry, everything they did was all preceded by warfare. The Greek ideal, the statue, was here is a statue of the kind of man that's going to be the best fighter in warfare. Their ideals, their stories, the Iliad, the Odyssey, it's all to invoke this heroic ideal, which will create a youth who will grow up to be a better warrior, whether you're in Sparta or whether you're in Athens. This precedes all of Greece. And the polis, the agoge, the forum, everything was truly about warfare, and they understood that. They understood that, even if it was not explicit in how they talked about things. And of course, this gets skewed significantly with the post-Socratics and Platonism. But it's like I think the issue today is that we don't realize that all our actions are truly the undercurrent of all our actions is warfare. And that if life is beautiful, and if life is beautiful just because the pure experience of life must be beautiful. And this is why Junger is so profound, is that he finds, like I said, he finds beauty in all the little things that happen in the battlefield, no matter how terrible. He saw like a little girl, blown apart, her blood spooled everywhere, something terrible. But even in seeing such misery, he still finds beauty. He watches his friends get cut down, cut apart by bullets, but he finds the beauty in their courage and their resolve to go forward nonetheless. In the very end of the war, where he got the Pour le Mérite, he earned the Pour le Mérite by coming this close to being captured. He was surrounded by British soldiers after they took one of their trenches. Did he surrender? No. Bleeding. He literally had to be basically carried away by his men. He did not surrender. He fought his way out. They broke out of this encirclement. Like, this is the kind of man that people should aspire to be. Somebody who understands what life is truly about. And once you understand what life is truly about, and that nothing is you're entitled to nothing, and that you have no real inborn inherent privilege to anything. Everything comes as a result of your action, as a result of your sacrifice. And when you understand this, you seek perfection, knowing you will never be perfect. You seek to constantly be becoming, to constantly be evolving. That's what's beautiful. That's what makes war beautiful, is that when it comes down to it, you see things as they really are. And you could lie to yourself, and a lot of modern morality leads to soldiers lying to themselves, and then it ruins their psyche, and then it ruins how they view things, and they start to feel guilty. But when you see life as it really is, it is completely beautiful, because life is beautiful, and beauty is affirming life in its totality, and it's understanding that this conflict of power and of different wills and inequality that comes from it, which separates different human types from another, which separates the greater human types, this is beauty, and this is why war is beautiful, and this is why life, which is war, is beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said it right there. You said it right there.
So yeah, that's my spiel. But any closing thoughts that you would like to bring up, Lance?
Read Junger. You have no choice. You will read it.
Yes. And if you don't read it, we will track you down, find your IP, and we will deliver you kindly some Junger books, and
Yes.
and wait.
Yes.
We will sit by your desk until you read it.
Yeah, we'll look at you and we'll tap the desk very patiently.
Very patiently, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, as like you said, read Junger. He's excellent, and I think that you can only learn from exposing yourself to these things, and it might be difficult at first. We've all been lib-coded from birth, and it's hard to break out, but you can break out. Lance and I are born into a very similar situation to a lot of you, where we're raised to think a certain way, but we have broken out of the matrix. You have to escape the matrix. You understand, Tristan? You have to escape the matrix. So this is the true red pill, guys. Take the true red pill and escape the matrix. But yeah, like I said, that's the life. Life is conflict. Life is struggle, and we want to show you that doesn't have to be a bad thing. That is in fact beautiful, right, Lance?
That's right. Join the Legion.
Indeed, that's right. Join the Legion. Reach out. I got my socials on the somewhere in my channel, so reach out if you want to learn more about the Legion. And if you're not legionary material yet, we will teach you how to be legionary material. So as always, this is the Warrior Philosopher, building the foundations of the warrior philosophy. Ave Bellator. Thank you, General Lance, for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Ave.